The red earth of Enugu swallowed Mary Okafor's coffin slowly, as if the ground itself hesitated to take her. Women wailed in that ancient rhythm only grief knows how to conduct. Men stood with hands folded behind their backs, eyes fixed on nothing, because looking at the coffin meant accepting she was really gone. The air smelled of fresh soil and wilting flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 3 times, as if counting the ways the village had failed her. Mary had been 34. Too young, too sudden, too suspicious. But in Nigerian funerals, you don't ask questions out loud. You swallow your suspicions with your tears and let the elders handle whispers. You perform your grief publicly and save your doubts for midnight conversations behind closed doors. That's how it's always been. That's how it was supposed to be today. Until Amara stepped forward. She was small for 10, with her mother's wide eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She wore a black dress that someone from church had given her. Too big at the shoulders, too long at the hem. Her hair was braided tight against her scalp in the simple style her mother used to do on Sunday mornings. She walked through the crowd like she was sleepwalking, her feet moving but her face blank, until she reached the place where the pastor stood. "I want to talk," she said. The pastor blinked. "Child, this is not the time. I want to talk about my mama." Silence dropped like a stone into water. Ripples of shock spread through the gathering. Children didn't speak at burials. Children stood quietly and cried when adults expected them to cry. They certainly didn't interrupt pastors or demand microphones or look at 200 mourners with eyes that had stopped being childish 3 days ago. But Auntie Ngozi, the women's fellowship leader who had been holding Amara's hand, saw something in the child's face that made her nudge the pastor aside. She bent down, her wrapper rustling, and whispered, "What do you want to say, my daughter?" "The truth," Amara said. Her voice was small, but it carried. "Mama told me to tell the truth if she didn't wake up." The pastor hesitated, then slowly, carefully, handed her the microphone. Later, people would argue about whether he should have done that. Whether children should be allowed to speak when grief makes them say wild things. But in that moment, something in the air shifted. Even the wind seemed to pause. Amara's small fingers wrapped around the microphone. The sound of her breathing echoed across the compound. Every eye locked on her. Even the professional mourners stopped their wailing. "My mama was happy before she died," Amara began, and her voice cracked on the word happy. She was so happy. She got promoted at work, from cleaner to secretary. They gave her a new office with her name on the door. She called me from work that day, and she was crying, but it was happy crying. She said, "Amara, we made it. God finally remembered us." Some women nodded. They remembered. Mary had been glowing those last few weeks. She'd walked through the market with her head high for the first time since her husband died 5 years ago. She'd even started building a house. A real house with a foundation and pillars, not the one-room place where she and Amara had been managing. "She started building our house," Amara continued. "Every Saturday, we would go to the land and watch the workers. Mama would pack jollof rice and chicken for them. She would walk around measuring things with her hands and smiling. She told me that house was going to be our new beginning. She said no one would ever call us poor again. She said." Amara's voice broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. The microphone trembled in her hands. She said Uncle Sam would never be able to look down on us again. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted toward the front row where Uncle Sam sat, dressed in his best black suit, face appropriately solemn. His wife, seated beside him, went rigid. "2 weeks ago, Uncle Sam came to our house," Amara said, and now her voice was stronger, fed by something deeper than grief. "He said Mama was being proud. He said she forgot that he was the one who paid for my father's burial. He said she was building a house, but she never even thanked him properly. Mama was calm. She told him she was grateful, but she earned her promotion with her own hands. Uncle Sam got angry. He said, 'Pride comes before a fall, Mary. You will see.'" The silence was absolute now. You could have heard a pin drop on that red earth. Uncle Sam's face remained neutral, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "3 days ago," Amara whispered, "Mama came home from work feeling tired. Uncle Sam's wife, Auntie Blessing, came to visit us that evening. She brought tea. Special tea, she said, for strength. Mama drank it because she didn't want to be rude." Auntie Blessing's face drained of color. That night, Mama was sick. So sick. She was shaking and holding her stomach and crying. I wanted to call the hospital, but she grabbed my hand, and she said, Amara's voice dropped to barely a whisper, and 200 people leaned forward to hear. She said, Amara, the tea tasted bitter. It tasted wrong. If anything happens to me, don't let Uncle Sam touch our house. Don't let him come near you. Promise me. The first scream came from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. Then another. Then the space erupted into chaos. Women surged forward. Men began shouting. The pastor stumbled backward. And Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam stood up slowly, his face twisted with something between rage and fear. This child is confused by grief, he roared. She doesn't know what she's saying. My wife brought tea to help. We are family. But Amara looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, and knew too much. You wanted our land, she said quietly into the microphone. You wanted Mama to fail. And when she didn't fail, you made sure she couldn't finish what she started. If this already grips your heart, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. It means more than you know. To understand why Uncle Sam hated Mary enough to destroy her, you had to go back 5 years, to the day her husband Christopher died. He'd been Uncle Sam's younger brother, the one everyone said had married beneath him. Mary came from a village where poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a reputation. Her father had been a palm wine tapper who drank more than he sold. Her mother sold oranges by the roadside until malaria took her when Mary was 12. When Christopher brought Mary home as his wife, Uncle Sam's face had said everything his mouth was too proper to speak. She wasn't educated enough, not refined enough, not connected enough. At the wedding, he'd given them an envelope so thin you could see through it, and later told anyone who would listen that his brother had thrown away his future for a pretty face and village hips. Then Christopher died in a motorcycle accident on his way home from work, and Uncle Sam's prediction seemed to come true with cruel accuracy. The company gave Mary a small settlement, enough to bury her husband properly and pay 3 months' rent. After that, she was on her own with a 5-year-old daughter and no skills except the ability to survive. That's when she went to CleanRight Services and begged for any work they had. They made her a cleaner in a corporate office building in the heart of Enugu. She mopped floors, scrubbed toilets, emptied bins that smelled of stale food and expensive perfume. She worked the early morning shift, 4 a.m. to noon, so she could pick Amara up from school in the afternoon. The pay was small, but it was steady. And Mary had learned long ago that steady was a blessing poor people couldn't afford to reject. Uncle Sam would visit sometimes, always unannounced, always with that look on his face like he was inspecting a disaster site. He'd walk into their single room, glance at the peeling walls and the mat on the floor where Mary and Amara slept side by side, and he'd shake his head slowly. Christopher would be ashamed, he'd say. His daughter living like this. His wife cleaning toilets. If you had just listened to me and moved back to your village, I could have found you a proper husband by now. But no, you wanted to be independent. He'd spit out that last word like it tasted bad. Mary would serve him water she couldn't afford to spare and say nothing. Because that's what widows did. They absorbed insults like dry ground absorbs rain, and they survived. But something changed 2 years ago. The CEO of one of the companies in the building Mary cleaned started arriving early for work. Mr. Chukwuma was the kind of man who noticed things, like how the floors on the 6th floor were always spotless by 7 a.m., or how someone had started arranging the magazines in the waiting room by date, or how the plants near the window were suddenly thriving because someone was actually watering them properly. One morning, he stopped Mary in the corridor. "You're the one who cleans this floor?" Mary's heart had jumped into her throat. In her experience, when bosses noticed you, it meant you'd done something wrong. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if. The place looks excellent. What's your name?" "Mary, sir. Mary Okafor." He nodded thoughtfully and walked away, and Mary had spent the rest of the day terrified she was about to be fired for some invisible offense. But the next week, Mr. Chukwuma called her to his office and asked if she could read and write. When she said yes, Christopher had made sure she finished secondary school before they married. Mr. Chukwuma offered her something impossible. "I need someone organized, someone trustworthy, someone who sees details," he'd said. "My secretary is retiring next month. I'm willing to train the right person. Are you interested?" Mary had thought she was dreaming. She'd gone home and told Amara, and they both cried and prayed and cried some more. For 2 months, she worked double, cleaning in the morning, learning secretarial work in the afternoon. She learned how to use a computer, how to answer phones professionally, how to manage schedules and type letters and organize files. Her hands, rough from years of holding mops and scrub brushes, learned gentleness on keyboard keys. When the promotion became official, with a salary that was 4 times what she'd been earning, Mary had walked into that office with her name on the door, Mary Okafor, Executive Secretary, and she'd wept so hard that Mr. Chukwuma had quietly left her alone for 10 minutes to collect herself. The first thing she did was find a plot of land. Not in an expensive area, but decent, solid, a place where she could build something that would last. She hired a contractor, drew up plans for a modest 3-bedroom house with a small garden where Amara could play. Every Saturday became sacred, mother and daughter walking their land, watching walls rise from nothing, planning which room would be whose. The village noticed. How could they not? Mary started dressing better, not flashy, but neat and dignified. She held her head differently. She stopped flinching when people asked about her work. At church, she started sitting closer to the front instead of hiding in the back row with the other struggling widows. She even joined the women's fellowship and paid her dues on time, in full, without needing to beg for extensions. People were happy for her. Most people. The kind of happiness that feels warm and genuine because they'd watched her suffer and survive. Auntie Ngozi hugged her after service one Sunday and said, "God has remembered you, my sister." Even Pastor Ezekiel used her story in a sermon about faith and patience. But Uncle Sam watched with different eyes. Each time he heard about Mary's promotion, about the house she was building, about how well Amara was doing in school now that her mother could afford extra lessons, something dark and bitter grew in his chest. He'd been the successful one, the one with the good job at the bank, the one with the nice house in the good neighborhood, the one people respected. Christopher's widow wasn't supposed to eclipse him. She was supposed to remain grateful, humble, dependent. The first confrontation happened at a family meeting. Someone mentioned Mary's new position, and Uncle Sam had slammed his hand on the table. "Everyone is praising her like she invented success," he'd said. "Has anyone asked how a common cleaner suddenly becomes a secretary? In this Nigeria? We all know what women do to get ahead." The room had gone silent. His wife Blessing had touched his arm in warning, but he'd shrugged her off. "I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. And now she's building a house. On what land? With what money? My brother is barely cold in his grave, and his wife is living like a rich woman. Something is not adding up." Word got back to Mary, of course. In Nigerian families, words travel faster than light. But she didn't respond. She just kept working, kept building, kept rising. And that silence, that refusal to be pulled down, made Uncle Sam's hatred grow roots. 3 months before Mary died, he'd gone to her workplace, showed up at the reception desk demanding to see her, making a scene, loud enough that security almost escorted him out. When Mary came down, embarrassed and frightened, he'd grabbed her arm and hissed, "You think you're better than me now? You think because one Oyobo man gave you a job, you can forget who buried your husband? Who fed you when you had nothing?" Mary had pulled her arm free, and for the first time in 5 years, she'd looked him in the eye without fear. "I earned this position with my own hands. I wake up at 4 a.m. I work hard. I don't owe you my failure, Uncle Sam." He'd left that day with murder already forming in his heart, though he didn't know it yet. He just knew he wanted her brought down, humiliated, reminded of her place. And when reminders didn't work, he chose something permanent. The evening Auntie Blessing came to visit with the tea, Amara had been doing her homework at the small table by the window. It was a Thursday, and Mama had come home earlier than usual, rubbing her temples and saying the day had been long. They'd eaten rice and stew, leftovers from yesterday, and Mama had been quiet in that tired way that meant she just needed to sit for a while without talking. The knock came at 6:30. Amara remembered because the evening news was just starting on the neighbor's television, the sound bleeding through the thin walls. When Mama opened the door, Auntie Blessing stood there with a covered flask and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sister Mary," she'd said, and her voice had that high, sweet tone people use when they're trying too hard to sound friendly. "I was passing by and I thought, this woman works so hard. Let me bring her something warm to drink. I made special tea, ginger, honey, lemon, and some herbs my mother taught me. It's good for stress." Mama had hesitated. Amara saw it. That brief moment where her mother's face registered surprise and something else, something cautious. Auntie Blessing had never visited them before. Not once in 5 years. When they saw each other at family gatherings, the greetings were stiff, formal, the kind of interaction between people who were related by marriage but not by choice. But Nigerian hospitality is a trap of its own making. You don't turn away someone who brings gifts, even if your instincts are screaming. You smile, you say thank you, you invite them in. Anything else is disrespect, and disrespect travels faster than kindness in family circles. Come in, Mama had said, stepping aside. Amara, bring the stool for Auntie. Auntie Blessing settled herself carefully, the flask balanced on her knees. She made small talk, asked about Amara's school, commented on how the room looked neat, mentioned that the rains would be starting soon. Her eyes kept darting around though, taking inventory, measuring, comparing. When she finally opened the flask, the smell that escaped was strong, medicinal, pungent, with something underneath that Amara couldn't identify. You have to drink it hot, Auntie Blessing insisted, pouring the dark liquid into the cup she'd brought with her. Another strange thing, bringing your own cup, as if she didn't trust whatever cups poor Mary owned. It works best when it's fresh. Mama took the cup with both hands and sipped. Immediately, her face changed. Just slightly, just for a second, but Amara saw it. Mama's eyebrows pulled together, her lips pressed tight, and she swallowed like the tea was fighting her on the way down. It's strong, Mama said carefully. Medicine is never sweet, Auntie Blessing replied, watching. Finish it. All of it. For your health. And Mama did. Because that's what you do when someone brings you something they claim is for your own good. You swallow your doubts along with whatever they're serving. You smile and say thank you and hope your suspicions are just paranoia born from years of poverty, making you see enemies in every shadow. Auntie Blessing stayed for exactly 10 minutes after Mama finished the tea. She stood up, smoothed her wrapper, and said, "Take care of yourself, Sister Mary. You're working so hard, building your big house. You need your strength." The way she said big house made it sound like an accusation. Then she left, taking her flask and her cup with her, leaving behind only that lingering medicinal smell and a feeling in the room like something had been disturbed. Mama was fine for the first hour. She bathed Amara, supervised the rest of her homework, watched half an episode of their favorite program. But by 8 o'clock, she'd started sweating even though the evening was cool. By 9, she was holding her stomach and making small sounds of pain. By 10, she was vomiting into a bucket while Amara cried and asked what was wrong. "I don't know, baby," Mama whispered between heaves. "I don't know. My stomach, it's burning. Everything is burning." Mrs. Adeyemi from 2 doors down heard the commotion and came to help. She took one look at Mama, the sweating, the shaking, the way her skin had gone gray, and said they needed to get to the hospital immediately. She flagged down an Okada, and Amara rode behind the driver while Mrs. Adeyemi held Mama upright on another motorcycle, racing through dark streets toward the general hospital. The emergency room was fluorescent bright and smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, but no urgency. They'd seen too much suffering to be shocked by one more sick woman. They put Mama on a drip, asked questions about what she'd eaten, poked and prodded while Mama lay there trembling. Amara sat on a plastic chair in the corridor, small and terrified, watching through the doorway as her mother suffered. At some point, she didn't know when, time had become strange and elastic. Mama called her over. Her voice was weak, barely audible above the sounds of the hospital. "Amara." Mama's hand was cold when she took it. "Listen to me, baby. Listen carefully. Mama, you're going to be fine. The doctors. Listen." There was urgency in Mama's eyes that cut through Amara's hope. The tea Auntie Blessing brought. It tasted wrong. Bitter in a way that wasn't natural. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have poured it out. "Mama, you're scaring me. If something happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen." "If something happens," Mama insisted, her grip tightening. "Don't let Uncle Sam take our house. Don't let him take our land. He's wanted me to fail since the beginning. He couldn't stand watching me succeed without his permission. Promise me, Amara. Promise me you'll tell the truth." "What truth, Mama? I don't understand." "You will. When the time comes, you will. Just promise me you'll be brave. Promise me you won't let them silence you the way they silenced me all these years." Amara promised, because what else could she do? She promised through tears that wouldn't stop coming. Promised while her mother's hand went from cold to colder. promised while nurses rushed in with concerned faces and urgent movements. Mary Okafor died at 3:17 a.m. The official cause was acute gastroenteritis, possibly from food poisoning, though the doctors couldn't be sure. They asked what she'd eaten, and Amara told them about the tea, but in the chaos and exhaustion of a Nigerian public hospital in the middle of the night, the information got lost in paperwork that would never be properly filed. The death certificate was signed. The body was released, and Uncle Sam, informed of his sister-in-law's death, arrived at the hospital with tears streaming down his face, playing the role of grieving family member with Oscar-worthy conviction. He'd tried to take Amara home with him that morning. "You can't stay in that room alone," he'd said, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "You're coming with me and Auntie Blessing. We'll take care of everything. The burial, the house, everything." But Amara had remembered her promise. She'd pulled away from his grip and said, "Mama's friend from church is taking me. Auntie Ngozi." It was a lie, but Auntie Ngozi, standing nearby, had seen something in the child's face that made her step forward and say, "Yes, yes, I'm taking her." Uncle Sam's eyes had gone flat with anger for just a second before the grief mask slipped back into place. "Of course," he'd said. "Of course. We'll discuss arrangements later." But Amara knew. In that moment, watching him walk away, she knew exactly what her mother had meant. She knew why the tea had tasted bitter. She knew who had wanted Mama to fail badly enough to make sure she never succeeded again. And now, at the burial, standing with a microphone in her hand and 200 witnesses watching, she was keeping her promise. She was telling the truth. And the truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. The chaos that followed Amara's testimony was the kind that lives in village memory for generations. Women screamed. Men shouted. Someone threw their Bible at Uncle Sam and missed, hitting the pastor instead. The burial became a trial right there in the red dirt, under the unforgiving afternoon sun, with Mary's coffin as the silent witness to everything her brother-in-law had done. Uncle Sam tried to run. That's what guilty people do when their masks finally crack. They run. He pushed through the crowd, his expensive shoes slipping on the loose soil, heading toward where the cars were parked. But Mr. Okonkwo, the retired police officer who lived 3 compounds away, was faster. He caught Uncle Sam by the collar and dragged him back like a goat headed to slaughter. "Where are you going?" Mr. Okonkwo's voice boomed across the compound. "You want to run from a child's words? If you're innocent, stand and defend yourself." Auntie Blessing had collapsed into her chair, weeping hysterically, her wrapper falling loose around her shoulders. "I didn't know," she kept screaming. "He told me it was just herbs to make her sick, just sick enough to need help, to need him. He said he wanted her to be humble again, to remember her place. I didn't know it would kill her. I swear to God, I didn't know." The confession spilled out of her like poison from a lanced wound. Once the first words escaped, the rest followed in a torrent. How Uncle Sam had been obsessed with Mary's success for months. How he'd raged at home about the injustice of a common cleaner rising above him. How he'd found a man in the village, one of those men everyone knows practices dark things, and purchased something that was supposed to cause suffering, not death. He said it would just make her sick, Auntie Blessing sobbed. Sick enough to lose her job, to stop building the house, to need his help again. He wanted her to come begging. He wanted everyone to see that she couldn't make it without him. But it was too strong, or maybe her body was weak. I don't know. "You killed her," someone in the crowd shouted. "Both of you. Murderers." The crowd surged forward. Village justice is swift and brutal, and in that moment, if the elders hadn't intervened, Uncle Sam and his wife would have been torn apart by the same people who'd been mourning with them minutes before. But Chief Okafor, the oldest man in the village, raised his walking stick and his voice. "Stop. This is not the way." His authority cut through the rage. "We are not animals. We will not soil this woman's burial with more blood. Mr. Okonkwo, take them both. The police must handle this properly." Mr. Okonkwo made phone calls. Within 30 minutes, a police van arrived. Unusual speed for Nigerian police. But then, Mr. Okonkwo still had friends in the force, and a murder confession witnessed by 200 people was not something easily ignored. They loaded Uncle Sam and Auntie Blessing into the van, while the crowd hurled insults and curses. "You were family," someone screamed. "She trusted you." Her husband's brother. His own brother's wife. Uncle Sam said nothing as they took him away. His face had gone empty, hollow, like a house after everything valuable has been stripped out. But just before they closed the van door, he looked at Amara, still standing by the grave, still holding the microphone, and something flickered in his eyes. Not remorse, recognition. The understanding that he'd been defeated not by police or courts, or even by his own wife's confession, but by a 10-year-old girl who loved her mother enough to be brave. The burial continued in a daze. The coffin was lowered while women sang hymns through tears that were different now. Not just grief, but rage and vindication and sorrow for all the ways Mary had been underestimated and attacked, and finally destroyed by the one person who should have protected her. Pastor Ezekiel could barely get through the committal prayers. His voice kept breaking. When it was done, when the earth had been shoveled back and the mound stood fresh and dark over Mary's resting place, people didn't leave. They gathered around Amara instead. Auntie Ngozi held her close. Other women brought her water, fanned her with newspapers, touched her head with blessings and prayers. The men stood in clusters talking about how they'd suspected something wasn't right, how Mary's death had been too sudden, too convenient, though none of them had said anything until a child forced them to see. Mr. Chukwuma, Mary's former boss, arrived late. He'd been traveling and rushed back when he heard. When someone told him what happened, his face went hard with anger and grief. He found Amara in the crowd and knelt down to her level. "Your mother was the finest person I ever employed," he said quietly. "Not because of her skills, though those were excellent, but because she had integrity. She worked like she was building something bigger than a job, bigger than a paycheck. Now I understand. She was building a future for you." He paused, then continued. "The company has a scholarship fund. You will never have to stop going to school because of money. I promise you that. And the house, your house, we'll make sure it's completed. Your mother's dream will not die with her." Amara nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down her face. The weight of everything, the loss, the testimony, the justice, the promises, pressed down on her small shoulders, but somehow she stayed standing. Because that's what Mama had taught her. You survive. You endure. You stand. The investigation that followed was unusually swift by Nigerian standards. Auntie Blessing's confession, given again at the police station with lawyers present, was damning. The medicine man was found and arrested. He confirmed he'd sold Uncle Sam a mixture of herbs and chemicals that he'd warned were dangerous, potentially lethal, but Uncle Sam had insisted he knew what he was doing. Toxicology tests on Mary's body, exhumed and examined, confirmed the presence of poisons that matched the medicine man's description. Uncle Sam was charged with murder. Auntie Blessing with conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact. The trial became regional news, not because murder was uncommon, but because the story had everything newspapers loved: family betrayal, jealousy, a dead woman who dared to rise above her station, and a child hero who spoke truth when adults stayed silent. Throughout it all, Amara lived with Auntie Ngozi and attended the trial whenever the lawyers said her presence was needed. She testified again, this time in a courtroom, telling the same truth she'd told at the burial. Uncle Sam's lawyer tried to break her story, suggesting she was confused, traumatized, manipulated by adults who wanted to frame his client. But Amara was unshakable. She remembered every detail of that evening. The flask, the cup, the way Mama's face changed after the first sip, the burning that came later, the final warning. The jury took 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty, both of them. Uncle Sam received life imprisonment. Auntie Blessing, because she cooperated and showed remorse, received 25 years. When the verdict was read, Amara felt something release in her chest. Not quite relief, because Mama was still gone, but something close to it. Justice, vindication, proof that speaking truth matters, even when you're small and scared and alone. The house was completed 8 months later. Mr. Chukwuma had been true to his word. The company's scholarship fund paid for it, finishing what Mary had started. It was modest but beautiful. 3 bedrooms painted cream and blue, a small garden where flowers were already growing, a front porch where Amara could sit and do homework on Saturday afternoons. On the day they dedicated the house, the same people who'd attended the burial came to celebrate. Pastor Ezekiel blessed every room. Women brought food, enough jollof rice and chicken to feed half the village. And in the living room, someone hung a photograph of Mary in her office. wearing her good blouse, smiling at the camera with pride and hope and the kind of joy that comes from earning your own success. Amara stood in her new bedroom, her own bedroom, with space for a proper bed and a desk and shelves for books, and thought about Mama, about how hard she'd worked, about how jealousy had killed her, about how love had avenged her. She thought about Uncle Sam sitting in prison, probably still believing he'd done nothing wrong, that Mary's rise had been the real crime. She thought about Auntie Blessing's tears, real but too late, remorse that couldn't resurrect the dead. She thought about all the other women like her mother, women trying to climb out of poverty, to build something better, to defy the expectations that pinned them down like butterflies to boards. And she made herself a promise. She would finish what Mama started. She would study hard. She would rise. She would build not just houses, but a life that honored everything her mother had sacrificed. And she would never, ever let anyone's jealousy make her smaller than she was meant to be. Outside, children played in the compound. The sun cast golden light across the new walls. And somewhere, Amara believed, Mama was watching, finally at peace, finally vindicated, finally resting in the knowledge that her daughter had been brave enough to speak truth when silence would have been easier. The smallest voice had brought down the biggest darkness. And justice, delayed but not denied, had finally come home. Mary Okafor's story teaches us that success often attracts both celebration and jealousy, and that those closest to us can sometimes be our greatest threats. But it also shows us that truth has a voice, even in the smallest, most unexpected places. Amara's courage reminds us that speaking up, even when terrified, can bring justice where silence would let evil win. Her mother's legacy lives on, not just in the house that was built or the life that was taken too soon, but in the unshakable strength of a child who loved enough to be brave. If this story touched your soul, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more true African stories that remind us of our shared humanity, our capacity for both darkness and light, and the power of truth to transform everything it touches.